I'm Stephanie Whitlow, 33 years old, and at my parents' anniversary party. My father opened my card, read the check, and barked across the table. "You only sent 60 dozens of heads turned," and someone muttered something about jealousy. Then Mom jumped in. "Stop trying to compete with your sister." I stood there with a forced smile while they all clapped for Rachel again, her champagne glass raised high. I hadn't planned on saying anything, but the words just came out. That was me. I sent the money. No one believed me, not even for a second. Before we get into the rest, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been the one expected to carry everything and stay quiet about it. I grew up just outside St. Louis in a small brick house with mint green shutters and a lawn. Dad mowed every Saturday. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. Dad worked long days at the firm, and Mom sewed hems and wedding gowns out of our basement. Her hands always smelled like fabric softener, and she could fix anything that frayed. Both of them believed in hard work and saving what you earned and keeping your head down and showing up early. We didn't talk about feelings much, but we never missed Sunday dinner, and every chore had a purpose from the outside. People probably thought our family was close-knit, polite, steady, just the way folks from our neighborhood were known to be. But inside our home, there was an invisible line, one that seemed to form the moment Rachel was born. I was 3, then old enough to remember the way everyone lit up when she giggled, the way her drawings ended up on the fridge, while my report cards got a nod and a good job. Rachel was sunshine bubbly creative, the one who sang off-key, in the car and made waiters laugh during birthday dinners. It wasn't that she tried to steal the spotlight. It was just always already on her when Rachel wanted something, even if it was mine. Mom would nudge me with a soft, "Let her have it, sweetie, you're the big sister." When she broke my science project, Dad patted her head and said, "You'll build another one, won't you, Steph?" The message was never shouted, but it echoed in everything. Rachel needs more. Rachel can't help it. Rachel comes first. By the time I was 10, I had stopped asking for things, just packed away whatever I wanted, and focused on doing well in school. I volunteered after class, took every advanced course, and kept a babysitting gig on weekends to save for college. I didn't mind the extra work at first. It felt like control, like maybe if I worked hard enough, they'd see me. Not just what I produced, but me. The first time I felt the full weight of being overlooked came at 13 when I won a piano competition after weeks of practicing late into the night. The recital landed on a Saturday, and I'd reminded Mom and Dad a dozen times. But that morning, Rachel had a cold. Nothing serious, just a low fever and a sore throat. Our neighbor offered to sit with her for a couple hours, but Mom said no, we can't leave her while she's sick. Family comes first. I played my piece alone that afternoon, smiling at strangers in the crowd, and afterward rode the bus home to find Rachel eating popsicles on the couch. No one asked how it went when high school came. I had a 4. GPA, worked part-time and still managed student council, while Rachel skipped from interest to interest, cheerleading one semester, theater the next. Each time she got a B or a small role, the family would treat it like a milestone. But when my college acceptance letters came, Dad simply said, "We'll need to see about scholarships," the night they celebrated Rachel's state school offer with a weekend trip to Chicago. I stayed back finishing a scholarship essay by the glow of my desk lamp. I didn't resent Rachel exactly. She wasn't cruel or smug, just used to being loved loudly, and I had learned to survive on quiet praise. I figured that was my place, the reliable one, the one who didn't need much, the one who would always be fine. What I didn't know then was how deeply that quiet would follow me into adulthood, and how one misunderstanding over a simple check would finally force all of us to speak the truth. I landed in St. Louis a few hours before the anniversary party started and took a cab straight from the airport to the venue. It was one of those banquet halls just outside the city, with folding chairs dressed in white covers and tables set with dollar store centerpieces. When I stepped through the doors, the place was already crowded with faces from every corner of our family tree, cousins I hadn't seen in years, great uncles who still called me the smart one. Even though they couldn't remember what I did for work, Mom spotted me first. She waved from across the room, her gold bangles catching the light as she stood beside a group of aunts. "Stephanie made it," she said. Like I was the unexpected guest who'd wandered in off the street, she hugged me lightly, then turned to her sisters. "This is my older daughter, the one who works in finance out east asset management," I corrected with a smile. No one noticed. One of the aunts chuckled. "Still single. You always were the serious one." Her voice held the same tone people used when talking about a neighbor who never married and kept too many cats. Before I could answer, Mom was already moving on, pointing out the photo display Rachel had made. She collected pictures from our whole marriage. Isn't she thoughtful? I excused myself to find Dad. He was near the bar, laughing loudly with a few of his old work buddies. He saw me and gave a one-armed hug. "You just get in an hour ago," I said. "Party started at 6. "Right? We've been here since 3, he replied. "You could have come earlier, helped set up." I let that pass as the evening wore on. I moved from table to table, answering the same small-talk questions about New York and work, while Rachel floated from group to group taking pictures and refilling wine glasses. People complimented her speech before she'd even given it. "She's always had a flair for the dramatic one," Uncle said, born to be in front of a crowd. The formal part of the evening began just after sunset. A cousin gave a welcome toast followed by a slideshow of Mom and Dad's early years, their wedding photos mixed with grainy prints from our childhood. Then Rachel stood up, holding a mic in both hands. Her voice broke in the first sentence, and she laughed nervously. "Sorry, I promised myself I wouldn't cry." She talked about love and sacrifice and how lucky we were to grow up with parents like ours. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. When it was my turn, I kept it short. I spoke about Dad's work ethic and Mom's patience, their ability to build a home in a country that wasn't theirs. I said, "I hope to carry that same resilience into my own life." The clapping was polite, no more, no less. After the toasts, we moved to the gift table. Everyone had brought something sentimental. Framed pictures, handmade quilts, scrapbooks. Mom opened each one slowly, thanking each guest with the same practiced smile. When it was my turn, I handed over a white envelope with a floral card tucked inside. I'd already sent a large arrangement earlier that morning and was planning to talk to them privately about helping with a vacation fund. This card wasn't meant to impress. It was symbolic inside, was a check for $60, 60 for 60 years together. A nod to tradition, not extravagance. Dad opened it, flipped it over and frowned. "You only sent 60. His voice wasn't quiet. Half the room turned. I felt the color rise in my face. "Sienna sends $5,000 a month," he added louder than necessary. "And you sent 60. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Rachel was nowhere in sight. Mom stepped forward, her expression tight. "Stop stealing her credit. Stephanie," her words came out sharp and fast. "You always have to compete with your sister." Someone behind me murmured something about jealousy. An uncle touched my shoulder awkwardly. "You both have your strengths. Don't let this ruin the night." My hands felt cold, but my face was burning. "That money," I said quietly, "was from me." It slipped out before I could stop it. "The $5,000 a month. I've been sending it. Not Rachel." Mom's face stiffened enough, she said. "Don't embarrass yourself." I stood there frozen as people looked away or whispered or stared at their shoes. I saw Jenna's name light up on my phone screen, my old college roommate texting. "How's the circus?" I typed back. "They think I sent 60 cents. Rachel's been taking credit for everything I've given them." Her reply came fast. "You okay? What are you going to do?" I stepped outside into the warm evening, the lights from the banquet hall casting long shadows on the asphalt. I opened my banking app and scrolled to the automatic transfers. 4 years of payments without question, without recognition. I tapped cancel. The next payment due in 5 days was the last I would ever send. I called a rideshare back to the hotel, texted Rachel that I had a migraine, and ordered a late dinner from room service. I didn't hear from anyone that night. Not Mom, not Dad, not Rachel. No one noticed I'd gone. The next morning I changed my flight and left for New York. Early, I didn't leave a note, and no one asked why I'd vanished. Not then. Not in the days that followed. It was as if I'd been erased. Except when they needed to mention money or draw comparisons, I was invisible in every other way. But I had made a decision, and now I was going to wait and see what happened when the money stopped coming. When I got back to New York, the city felt louder than usual. Even the subway seemed sharper, more restless. I unpacked my bag, poured a glass of water, and sat down at the edge of my bed. The apartment was still the same. Everything in its place, the armchair by the window, the framed degree on the bookshelf, the stack of unopened mail by the kitchen sink. But something had shifted and I couldn't quite name it. The next morning was a Monday and work moved fast, numbers to run reports to file meetings stacked one after another. But in the quiet moments between tasks, I caught myself wondering if anyone from home had called or even noticed I'd left early. There was nothing in my messages, no missed calls, no voicemails, nothing from Rachel, nothing from Mom or Dad. 3 days passed, then a week. By the second week, I stopped checking my phone so often, but there was still a weight behind my ribs, like I was bracing for something that wouldn't come. Then on a Thursday evening, 32 days after the party, my phone rang. The screen showed my parents' landline. I stared at it as it buzzed against the counter before answering. I took a breath and said, "Hi." "Hello, Stephanie." Dad's voice was tight, formal. "We're fine. Just, well, there seems to be a problem with Rachel's bank transfer. It didn't come through this month." He paused. "Do you know anything about that?" I kept my tone calm. "Have you asked Rachel?" "We did," he said. "She told us it might be a bank error. She's looking into it, but it's been over 2 weeks now, and we've had some bills come due." I sat down slowly. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Those monthly transfers weren't from Rachel. They were from me." He gave a short laugh that didn't sound amused. "That's not funny. I'm not joking," I said. "I have every record I can show you, starting from 4 years ago, when I first set it up at $2,000 a month, then increased it to $5,000. After my promotion. Are you really that jealous of her success?" he said sharply. "Why would you make up something like this?" His voice held disbelief, but not confusion. "Check your bank statements," I said. "The account number ends in 4736. That's my checking account. I can send you the documents now if you'd like." He didn't say anything for a moment, then added, "Sienna, Rachel told us she has high-profile clients. She's doing really well," she said. "She's routing the money through you for tax reasons." I closed my eyes. "That's not how taxes work, and you know what I do for a living? I'd never risk my license on something like that." He sighed but didn't respond. I told him I'd email him the proof and that he could call me back once he'd looked through it. Then I hung up and sent everything. Every transfer confirmation, every PDF statement, even the cancellation notice from last month. The email was opened an hour later, but the phone stayed silent until just before 9 that night when Mom called. Her voice was clipped. "How could you do this to your sister? She said she told us everything, how you're trying to humiliate her because you've always been threatened by her creativity. Mom, did you look at the documents I sent? Anyone can make fake statements these days. We trust our daughter. She wouldn't lie to us," she answered quickly. "Just call the bank," I said. "Ask them who made the deposits." Her voice cooled. "Rachel told us you agreed to help with the transfers," she said. You were finally being supportive. She lied, I said quietly. This has gone on for years, and I stayed quiet because I didn't want recognition. I just wanted to help. We don't want to argue, she said. We'll sort this out as a family. Not by dragging strangers into it. The call ended. There no apology, no acknowledgement, just silence. 3 days later, Dad called again. This time his tone was quieter. We spoke to the bank. He said they confirmed everything. It came from your account. Not hers, not a joint account. Yours. I didn't speak. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Would you have believed me? I asked. You didn't believe me last week, even when I sent the proof. He didn't answer right away, then said, We talked to Rachel again. She admitted some things. She hasn't had steady work in months. The business never really got off the ground. She's been borrowing from friends, trying to keep up appearances. He sounded tired more than anything else. We believed what we wanted to believe. He said, We haven't been fair to you. Not now. Maybe not ever. I let the words settle. We've become dependent on that money, he added. Grace retired. Her hands can't handle the tailoring anymore. My hours are down. We're behind on the mortgage. Listened. We're not asking you to keep sending it, not unless you're willing. I'm not, I said. Not unless we sit down face to face and talk about all of it. The money, the lies, the past, everything. He didn't argue. Can you come to St. Louis next weekend, he asked. Yes, I said. I'll be there. I flew into St. Louis late Friday afternoon, and this time I didn't book a hotel. I stayed in my old room, the one with faded wallpaper and a creaky twin bed that still held the outline of who I used to be. Mom didn't say much when I arrived. She had dinner on the stove and set out 3 plates. Not 4. Dad greeted me at the door, like he would a guest. Polite but cautious, as if waiting to see which version of me had shown up. Rachel was late. She arrived just after 7, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a pie from the grocery store. She placed it on the counter. Without a word, we ate in silence, passing bowls and avoiding eye contact. Mom asked once if I needed more potatoes, then said nothing else. Dad mostly stared at his plate. Rachel picked at her food, her phone face down beside her. No one mentioned the anniversary party. No one brought up the bank transfers or the calls after dinner. Mom started clearing dishes, but I stood up. And said plainly, We need to talk now. Dad nodded. Living room 5 minutes. We sat in the front room, the one no one ever used except for holidays. The plastic runner was still under the coffee table, and the bookshelf held photo albums, thick with memories. Rachel sat on the ottoman. Mom and Dad took the couch. I stayed in the armchair closest to the window. I think we should start with the truth about the money. I said for 4 years. I've been sending $5,000 a month to support you both. Rachel let you believe it was from her, and I want to understand why Rachel didn't look up. She kept her hands folded in her lap. They assumed it was me. She said quietly, I never actually told them that. I just didn't correct it. You knew they believed it, though, I said. She nodded yes. Why, I asked. You knew I was the one sending it? Her voice cracked. Because for once they looked at me with pride, not because I was the youngest or because I was the fun one, but because they thought I'd done something that mattered. Mom shifted uncomfortably on the couch, but Dad stayed still, his gaze fixed on the far wall. You always had their respect. Stephanie Rachel continued, You had the grades and the career and the money. I had nothing except the way they saw me when they thought I was helping. I blinked slowly. You think I had their respect? Rachel looked up, finally, her eyes red. You don't. I was the one they forgot to clap for at graduations. I was the one who sat alone at recitals because you had a cold and they couldn't leave you. I worked 3 jobs in college and no one asked how I was doing. Mom opened her mouth, but Dad touched her arm gently and said, Let her speak. I kept going. I spent years proving myself because I thought maybe someday they'd be proud of me, not just for being dependable or quiet or successful, but for being their daughter too. Mom moved from the couch to the floor, kneeling beside my chair. She took my hands gently. "We were wrong," she said. "We thought we were doing what was best, giving you space because you were so capable, giving Rachel attention because she seemed to need it more. But we didn't see what it cost you both." Dad cleared his throat. "We created something we didn't understand, a competition that wasn't real, but that hurt both of you all the same." No one said anything for a long time. Rachel was crying. Mom was still holding my hands, and Dad looked older than he had just 2 days before. "We need to stop pretending everything's fine," I said. "This didn't start with the money. It started when we were little, when I was told to be the example and Rachel was told to be the joy." Rachel wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve. "I don't know who I am without their approval," she said. "You had to be strong because they expected you to. I never learned how to be on my own. They always softened everything for me." "Then maybe it's time we both learned something new," I said. "You figure out who you are, and I figure out how to stop tying my worth to what I can give." The conversation went on for hours. We talked about college, about birthdays, about the silence that had lived in our house for too long. We didn't solve everything, but we started something honest, and that was more than we'd had before. By Sunday, I had private conversations with each of them. Rachel and I talked about boundaries and rebuilding trust. I told her I wouldn't continue giving money directly, but I could help her look into career counseling. If she wanted to start over in New York, she agreed to think about it with Mom. I accepted her apology and said I was open to more regular visits, as long as our conversations went both ways, no more one-sided check-ins or surface-level chats. She hugged me tightly and said, "I want to know you now." Not just the daughter I thought I had. Dad was the hardest. I told him I wouldn't resume the payments. I explained that it had created something unhealthy between us, but I also offered to help them plan a budget and set up an emergency account. He didn't argue, he just nodded, then said, "I'm proud of you, Stephanie, not because of your job or what you gave us, but because you stood up and told the truth." I nodded back. "Thank you." As for Rachel, she still had a long road ahead, but something about her seemed different this time, like she was finally ready to stand without leaning on everyone else. I flew back to New York early Monday morning. The city looked the same, but something in me had shifted. My apartment was still quiet. The routines unchanged, but the silence didn't carry the same weight. I unpacked slowly, made coffee, and wrote out a list. I wanted to follow through on the promises I made in St. Louis, but I also knew I needed to make space for myself, not just as a daughter or a sister, but as a person. Rachel called later that week. We spoke for nearly an hour, not about the past, but about what came next. She asked if I really thought she could start over in a place like New York. I told her the truth. It won't be easy, but if you're willing to work for it, there are people who can help. She asked about the programs I mentioned, and I emailed her a few links for career coaching and certificate options in retail merchandising. She didn't ask for money, and I didn't offer it. We both seemed to understand that had to change if anything was going to heal between us. 2 weeks later, she let me know she'd applied for a few entry-level positions in visual displays and had an interview lined up with a department store chain. She didn't say much else, but her voice sounded lighter, and for now that was enough. Mom called a few days after that. She told me she'd started seeing a few long-time clients again. Small tailoring projects she could manage without strain. "I miss the work," she said, "but I'm going to be more careful this time." We talked about simple things, books, food, weather. It was the most natural conversation we'd had in years. Dad sent over their financial documents just like we'd agreed, and I sat down one evening to help create a manageable monthly budget. I highlighted areas where they could cut back and set up an automatic system for their utilities and insurance. The goal wasn't to control their choices, just to make sure they wouldn't fall into debt again without realizing it. I created a shared emergency savings fund, one they could access if truly needed, but it was separate from me completely. No more monthly transfers, no more blurred lines. Rachel texted to tell me she got the job. It wasn't glamorous. She said part-time and early hours, but it was hers. She sent a photo of her name badge taped to the mirror in what looked like a shared break room first step. She wrote, I replied, proud of you, and meant it. We started talking once a week, short calls at first, sometimes just to check in, sometimes to talk through her new schedule or what to cook with cheap groceries. She mentioned therapy in passing. Once said she liked the woman she was seeing. I didn't press but offered to help her find local options. If she ever needed someone new at work, I started pulling back from the 70-hour weeks I'd fallen into for years. I talked with my manager about delegating more and took my first real vacation in almost 4 years, a quiet week upstate where I read, slept, and didn't check email once. That's when I met Gabriel, a friend of a friend who worked as an architect, soft-spoken, with kind eyes and a slow way of listening that made you feel like your words had weight. We started seeing each other on weekends. No pressure, just slow dinners and long walks around the city. He never asked about my family at first, but when I told him the story, he just nodded and said, that couldn't have been easy. Mom and Dad adjusted to their new reality. They sold the house and moved into a smaller condo nearby, easier to maintain, and closer to Dad's remaining work contracts. Mom found joy in hand sewing again, taking on just the clients she loved most, nothing high volume, no stress for their next anniversary. I took them on a quiet weekend trip to Michigan, just the 3 of us. No fancy gifts, no envelopes, just time. We stayed in a little lakeside cabin and cooked our own meals. Mom brought a quilt to finish. Dad read by the water. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and that meant more than any party could have. Rachel paid off one of her credit cards and called to tell me about it. She said it like it was a small thing, but her voice cracked a little at the end. I didn't think I'd ever dig out, she said, but now I think I might. We didn't talk about the past often, but when we did, it felt honest, not rehearsed, not defensive, just real. She knew what she'd done, and I knew what I'd allowed, and somewhere in between, that was where we started building something new. One Saturday afternoon, she came by the apartment and we went through her updated resume. She asked me to look it over before she sent it to a merchandising firm for a full-time position. I don't want you to feel like you have to fix this for me, she said. I just trust your eye. I know, I said, and I trust yours too. The steps were small but steady, and for the first time in years they felt like they were going in the right direction. I didn't expect everything to change overnight, but even so, the quiet that settled in over the next few months was different. It wasn't avoidance or tension, just a kind of pause, like all of us were catching our breath after too many years of pushing through at work. I kept my usual pace, but I stopped saying yes to every last-minute request. I started coming home before dark more often than not. And Gabriel and I began seeing each other more regularly, Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, Sunday evenings with takeout and a shared blanket on the couch. No big declarations, just consistency. Rachel was still at the department store part-time, but she'd started a certificate program in visual merchandising on her days off. Her schedule was full, but for the first time, she didn't seem overwhelmed. She called it on Thursdays now, usually while walking home, and we'd talk about display ideas or meal planning, or sometimes just sit in silence with the line open between us. She paid off another credit card and told me, only after it had cleared. It's not much, she said, but I didn't ask anyone for help, and I stuck to the plan. I told her it mattered, and it did. Mom and Dad were adjusting, too. Dad picked up more hours with one of his old clients. Not a full return to work, but enough to give them a buffer. Mom took on a few tailoring jobs again, only for people she liked, and only when her hands felt strong enough, she sent me a photo of a baptism gown she'd finished for a neighbor's granddaughter. This one made me smile. She wrote, "Our phone calls became more regular. Mom asked about my work without immediately changing the subject. Dad listened longer before offering advice, and when they came to visit in early spring for a weekend, they didn't stay with Rachel. They stayed with me. Cooked dinner the first night, simple roast chicken and vegetables, and we ate together in my small dining nook with candles flickering on the windowsill. Afterward, Dad helped wash dishes without being asked, and Mom folded the kitchen towels the way she used to back home that Sunday. We visited the Met. Rachel met us there straight from her shift. She wore all black still in her work clothes, but her face lit up when we reached the exhibit. She'd wanted to see a textile installation, layered in color and movement. We stood in front of it shoulder to shoulder and didn't say much, but the silence felt full. Not empty later. Over coffee, Rachel said, "I might apply for the assistant merchandiser role that just opened up. It's full-time and a little more pressure, but I think I'm ready." Dad nodded slowly. "You've been working hard," he said. "You're showing us what you can do." She smiled, but didn't cry, and neither did I. A few weeks after that, Mom called to say she'd set up a payment plan for their property taxes without asking for my input or money. She wanted me to know, but not because she needed help, just because she was learning to handle it herself. I updated the Family Emergency Fund with their new expenses and shared the breakdown over email. They replied within the hour and said thank you, not with assumptions, but with appreciation. Gabriel came to dinner that month and met everyone properly. Dad asked about architecture, and Mom asked if he liked spicy food. Rachel offered to bring dessert and showed up with a peach tart she'd made from scratch. It wasn't perfect, but it was sweet and warm, and that was enough. After they left that night, Gabriel helped me clear the dishes, then stood beside me at the sink. "They're trying," he said. "You can see it." I nodded. "So am I?" That spring, we celebrated Rachel's full-time offer with dinner at a tiny Italian place she picked. She paid for her own meal and left the tip in cash under the candle jar. I used to hate when you insisted on covering everything she said now. "I get it. It's not about money. It's about being able to stand up straight when you walk away from the table. We didn't toast or make speeches, but when the bill came, we both looked at it and laughed. Neither of us had expected the pasta to be so expensive. We split it anyway. At work, I was offered a new role, managing a team for the first time. It came with a promotion and a new title. But what felt bigger was the way I handled it. I celebrated not with champagne or a shopping spree, but with a call to Jenna, my old roommate, the one who used to leave protein bars on my desk during finals week. She picked up right away, and when I told her the news, she shouted, finally loud enough that her dog barked in the background, "You've been doing that job for a year already." That night, I wrote a list, not a to-do list, but a reflection of where things stood. The family budget was stable. Rachel was working full-time. Mom was sewing again. Dad was back to cracking jokes at dinner, and I was sleeping better than I had in years. No one was perfect, but we were showing up, and sometimes that's where healing begins. Not with grand gestures or long apologies, but with small, steady acts of change. The following winter brought its share of quiet struggles. We still had moments when old habits resurfaced. Mom would occasionally forget and call Rachel first to share family updates. Dad sometimes defaulted to praise. That sounded more like comparison than support. And there were days when Rachel called me just to vent about something small, and I had to remind myself not to jump in and solve it. But we were learning, and more importantly, we were talking about it when something felt off. We named it. We didn't let it fester. My therapist, Dr. Larson, had been helping me unpack patterns I hadn't realized were still shaping my days. She pointed out how often I used the word useful when describing myself at work or in relationships, how quickly I apologized even when I hadn't done anything. "Wrong," she said. "You were trained to earn space by solving problems, Stephanie, but love doesn't have to be transactional." I wrote that down on a sticky note and kept it tucked inside my planner. Rachel's therapist was helping her too. They were working through her fear of failure and how deeply she'd tied her worth to external validation. Sometimes she'd text me after a session just to say, "I get it now," or "Do you remember when?" And we'd talk about things we hadn't spoken aloud in years. Gabriel and I grew closer during that time. He didn't press for stories, but he always listened when I offered them. When I told him about the piano recital Mom and Dad missed all those years ago, he asked what piece I had played, then looked it up and played it quietly one evening while we ate dinner. My promotion became official in March, Vice President of Asset Management with a team of 12 and responsibility over a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. My colleagues congratulated me with flowers and a small celebration in the office. But the moment that stayed with me came later that week. Rachel called mid-morning. "I saw your announcement on LinkedIn," she said. I showed everyone at work. I smiled. "Thanks, Rach. You know." "I used to think success looked like something shiny and fast," she said. "Now I think maybe it looks like showing up for your own life over and over, even when no one claps." I didn't say anything right away, just let her words settle. That weekend, our parents came up for a short visit. We had lunch at a small neighborhood spot, and afterward went back to my apartment. Mom brought along an old photo album she'd found while cleaning out a storage bin in the condo. We sat on the couch flipping through the pages, pictures of birthdays, holidays, Rachel's school plays my graduation cap, Dad in his old windbreaker mowing the lawn. One page had a snapshot of me at age 13, standing beside a small upright piano holding a certificate. Mom reached for it gently. "You look so proud," she said. I wish I had been there. I looked at her for a moment and said softly, "Me too." Dad cleared his throat and said, "We missed more than we realized, but we're trying." "Now," I nodded. I know they left the next morning and I walked them to the train station before they boarded. Mom hugged me longer than usual and Dad said, "Call when you get the chance. Not just when something's wrong, I promised I would." A few weeks later, Rachel called from her apartment to say she'd finally finished decorating it on her own. She wanted me to come by and see what she'd done with the space I brought over lunch, and when I arrived, she opened the door beaming. She had hung art on the walls and painted one accent wall in deep blue. "This is the first time I've lived somewhere that feels like it's mine," she said. "I used to think I needed someone else to give me permission to grow. Now I just need a calendar and a plan." We sat on her tiny sofa with our sandwiches and talked about nothing important until the sun dipped behind the buildings and the room filled with warm amber light. The last thing she said before I left stuck with me. "You never asked for recognition, but you deserved it. I'm sorry. I took credit for what you gave. I didn't need her to say it, but I was glad she did." 2 years have passed since that weekend in St. Louis, and though the big shifts happened quickly, the quiet ones took time, like learning how to speak a new language where honesty replaces assumption and affection doesn't come wrapped in obligation. Rachel still works full-time in visual merchandising and recently earned a promotion to assistant manager. She sends me photos of the displays she designs and sometimes calls just to talk through a color palette or layout decision. Our conversations aren't filled with apologies anymore. They're filled with real things, shared freely without expectation. Mom and Dad have settled into their new rhythm. They still live in the smaller condo and still tease each other when one forgets the grocery list. Dad finally retired for good last fall, and Mom quilts more often now. Mostly baby blankets for neighbors or family friends she called last week, just to tell me she'd found a blueberry pie recipe she thought I'd like, not because she needed anything, just because it reminded her of me. I still keep the emergency fund, but we talk about it openly. Now every decision is made together. No more secrecy, no more pretending everything's fine when it isn't. We've built something steadier, one conversation at a time. As for me, my work continues to grow, but so does my life outside of it. Gabriel and I are talking about moving in together. Nothing rushed, just the slow understanding that something good can take root when there's space for it to breathe. I leave the office by 6. most days now, and I no longer measure my worth by how tired I am at the end of the week. I still see Dr. Larson, and in our sessions, I've begun to understand how much of my life was built on the belief that being needed was the same as being loved. I'm learning that setting boundaries isn't rejection and asking for help isn't failure. It's been slow work but steady. The biggest change isn't what I do. It's how I feel when I'm doing it lighter, more grounded, less like I'm performing and more like I'm choosing. I no longer shrink myself to keep the peace or overextend just to be seen. The truth is, we're all still healing. Mom still catches herself comparing us sometimes, and Dad still praises with numbers how many hours worked, how much was saved. But now when it happens, I don't go silent. I speak up, and they listen, and that's what matters. Rachel and I aren't just sisters again. We're friends. Sometimes we laugh so hard we cry, and other times we just sit on the phone without talking, both doing our own thing. But somehow together, I used to think justice had to be loud, dramatic, final. But now, I think it can also be quiet, like a closed door you no longer knock on, or a phone call that ends in laughter instead of disappointment. It can look like balance, like clarity, like choosing yourself and still leaving room for others to find their way back. So if you're listening and you've ever felt unseen in your own family or carried more than your share of the weight, I hope you remember this. Your value isn't in what you provide or how quietly you endure. It's in who you are whole and steady even when no one claps. Thank you for listening to my story. If it made you think of your own, I'd love for you to share it in the comments, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. It means more than you know.